Today's episode of Northern Lights is presented by Northstar Law Group, a trusted partner for small businesses in Minnesota's legal cannabis industry. Whether you've already applied for a license or just getting started, attorney Jen Reise and her team can help you build a compliant business, identify and navigate risks, put together an application, and keep you informed about the ever-changing Minnesota cannabis landscape. Are you ready to add Northstar to your team? Visit northstarlaw.com/cannabis and let Northstar Law Group guide you through confidently opening your doors. Again, that's northstarlaw.com/cannabis. And we're back, sitting here today with a longtime friend of the show, head of cannabis and business law at Northstar Law Group, Jen Randolph Reise. Hey there, Jen.
Hey, Tanner. Really glad to be here again.
Yeah, I'm super happy to have you here. Now, we're sort of in the new studio, not for watchers, viewers of the show, but for you. And what's so cool, we were chatting about this before we came in. You are the first guest that we had in our audio version way back in the day with blankets hung around us.
Yes, that was very fancy.
Yeah, that was cool. And then we moved over to the wonderful Dabbler Depot. They had their coffee shop. They have that cool studio in the back. We were recording there, and now we're here at Seed and Sesh, Payne Avenue. Cool
Seed and Sesh is very cool. I'm wondering if there's like a Steve Martin 5-time SNL jacket in it for me. Like a smoking jacket would be great.
We'll get you some a golden sea vault. We'll find something for you.
Okay, I'm excited. Yes, thank you.
But so catch us up a little bit. You were on the show last sort of before our summer break. Viewers probably remember that super fun 420 special that we did.
That was fun.
That was a hoot. But there's been so much that has happened in our industry. Has happened generally. We're going to talk about some of the news a little bit today. But first off, just like, what have you been up to over the summer?
Oh, man, I have had a busy summer. So excited to be able to help a lot of social equity applicants get their licenses in, so that midnight of August 12th was a day that was circled on my calendar, months in advance. And my team and I were trying to figure out the best way to help our clients, move towards that deadline, whether we were just helping them figure out whether they were social equity applicants or with sort of unique questions, or helping them actually complete the license application. So that was a huge chunk of work. And then I went to the lake for the rest of the week and missed CannaCon, which was good, even though I heard that CannaCon was very fun.
But it's good to check out, especially post-application period.
Oh, yeah. I knew I was going to be fried, and I was. So, and then but then I turned right around and thought, okay, well, what's the next phase, right?
For sure.
And not to steal our later thunder, but I decided the next phase was going to be real estate and city zoning based, and that I needed to skill up on that. And it was also going to be, at some point, we were finally going to have a lottery, and that I needed to figure out how to help Minnesota cannabis entrepreneurs stand up a highly regulated business in 18 months.
Yeah.
And at which point I called you.
Yeah.
As you know.
Absolutely. Yeah. So super excited to be joining the Northstar team. Super excited to have you on the Northern Lights team. But yeah, it's been cool being able to come in and see the work that our office does, helping new entrepreneurs as they're figuring out what is their cannabis business going to look like.
Yes. You've been doing such amazing education here and at the Minnesota Cannabis College. And I think, like many people in this industry, like, why would we look for someone that we don't know to collab with on something that's really hard? Could we just use somebody who we already respect and who we have already seen killing it?
Well, I appreciate that.
So
yeah.
I'm glad to have you on board half-time and look forward to our continued collaboration on that.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate that. It's been cool being able to come online, being able to sort of help people explore what cannabis looks like and what adult use legalization is going to look like in Minnesota and in the cities in rural Minnesota throughout the state.
Right. I really feel like we have a chance right now, not just right now, in general, that we and the people that we know have a chance to make Minnesota craft cannabis real.
Yeah.
And it's exciting to see what has happened to point on that, and then try to figure out where the next steps are.
And all of those applications that you submitted, they've already gotten calls back that they're approved. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, no. It's been a long process. I think longer than either of us expected. We were at a panel not that long ago, a couple of months back, speaking about this, and estimated maybe by the end of the year. Man, it's been sort of tough looking at all of it rolling out.
Yeah, I at one point had said I thought the lottery would be October 1st. Just that was my shot in the dark based on the information that I had. And I'm always sad to be wrong, but I'm really sad to be wrong about that because the longer that this thing draws out and we don't have the lottery and we don't have people who are able to open, then we don't have any early cultivation happening in order to get product that can be sold by those dispensaries. And like, we all knew this. We worked really hard at the end of the legislative session to figure out how to do that and to advocate for the way that we thought that it should be done. And so it's sad to see the process play out in a way that feels like that window is closing.
For sure. I recall a certain speaker during the legislative session often laying out for the lawmakers, if you want stores to open April, you have to have, product harvested and in jars by this date. You have to have plants in the ground by this date. And we've passed so many of those deadlines by this point. I'm hoping that things get moving forward soon here.
Well, because before that, you have to install your lights.
Yeah.
Before that, you have to order your lights. Before that, you have to have a damn building, etc. Right? Like, there are so many steps to this, and we are in this weird situation where social equity applicants were allowed to apply without any property, any specific property, because that so decreases the capital required, at least to get to the license application process. But it means that there is a lot of work to be done quickly on the back end once we finally have this lottery. Yeah.
Well, I'm happy to come on board and happy for the work that you and people are doing in the state here to help make sure that those stores are ready to open and get to that point. But so we got a lot to talk about today.
Yeah.
I'm excited to have a lawyer on. And well, I know you do more than just looking at court cases. You do a lot of business advising. You actually have a background in securities. I don't know if people know that, but I have to
Buying
ask
and selling
you,
companies, cap tables.
Yeah, it was
that's
cool
my jam.
coming in your office and seeing the Caribou Cup on the shelf.
Yeah, I was part of the team at Briggs & Morgan that helped sell Caribou back in, what would that have been, like 2008?
Yeah, for
Something
sure.
like that.
I think that's so neat. But I first have to ask you about a court case out of the highest court in the entire land, which is Judge Judy.
Judge Judy.
Yeah. So probably people read in Nuggets a couple of weeks ago. You actually had turned me on to it just a couple days before that there was a court case that made its way to Judge Judy of 2 Minnesota hemp operators that sort of had a falling out.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit more about like what the case was, but more importantly, what are some of the big takeaways that we can learn from this TV show court case?
Yeah. I mean, I like Judge Judy. I used to watch Judge Judy when my kids were little, and that's what was on TV. This was before Netflix.
Okay.
But I think what she does is she makes it more entertaining. What she's doing is essentially conciliation court, right? Small claims court where people can take each other to court for damages and don't usually have an attorney representing them because the amount that's in dispute is relatively low. I'm not sure what it is, $10,000 or something. And so I think what we saw in that case is actually pretty representative of what we would see in conciliation cases in general, and gives us some lessons about as we look for collabs, because basically what this was an idea that 2 parties had for a collaboration, and it didn't work out. And so then one was left with equipment that they didn't really want to have. Somebody's inventory was held by the other party until they could come to an agreement about money, etc. And one of the things that I noticed about that case was there was so little written down, right? There was no original statement about what they were hoping to do together or how the money would flow if they were successful, much less what would happen if they were not successful, which we always have to remember. That's part of my job as a corporate lawyer, is to be the Eeyore, right? Well, I mean, it could work really well, but what if it doesn't? But
I love that analogy. That's super funny. Yeah.
But by talking about how it could go wrong up front, then it lets us come up with fair solutions as we enter into a partnership. When we enter into an idea and we just assume it's going to be great, we see results like this where both parties were very, very upset with each other. There more money was lost than was strictly needed because inventory went bad, and there was people giving each other a hard time on social media. And then they had to pay to go to conciliation court. Here's the other lesson that we learned. You know who Judge Judy or the conciliation court is going to find for? The person who has the better paperwork.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, that was one thing that really stood out to me as well, is you have two people come in, both very different sides of this argument. One had written documentation of here's how much of everything was taken. The other guy had like an estimation, like roughly $500.
Yeah, he was just saying stuff, and the court's like, well, that doesn't help us at all. You can't just say things, right? You need to have records that were contemporaneous to the time of the thing that they are proving, and then now we have data, right? And so this really says to me the importance of having agreements up front, if we can, at least, napkin agreements, a couple of terms by an email that somebody responds to and says, yeah, that's it. Okay. And then keeping records as we go, keeping records of inventory that is delivered or received or destroyed or whatever, is a super important practice. Metric is going to make us do it once we get to being licensed businesses. So let's let's baby step ourselves there now.
Yeah.
Even though it's, annoying and takes personnel. Good records is an expense for a business.
Yeah. I think like you've talked about, it's the professionalization of our industry. It might have been cool at a time to be in the cannabis industry and have cash sales that are all handshake agreements. But we sort of, as we come out into the light, as legalization happens, we need to move past that, if you will.
Especially if we hope to use the court system to resolve disputes, as I would hope that we would.
For sure. Yeah, I think stuff like this is only going to become more common in the Minnesota courts. You didn't often have, black market or legacy distributors suing each other over, hey, you owe me this product. But I think as more stores open, that'll become more often.
Yeah, these contract claims, it's a good use of our court system to untangle some of these things. Yes.
Well, I appreciate you talking a little bit about that case. I think at times people look at Judge Judy and go, oh, that's sort of silly. But like you said, it's a good breakdown of what conciliation court looks like. And we can take a lot of lessons away that I hope people watching that are in the industry really do put into action of please write things down, document. So now I want to ask you about court cases that I think have a little bit more impact on the day-to-day cannabis industry here in Minnesota. You had a really great piece that was published in the Blunt Strategies newsletter. It was really cool being able to read about two cases that came out that are affecting people. The first one was one that involved Minnesota Wes King. So he had sued the OCM saying that the lottery needed to be halted because he had received a stay of adjudication on his record, but that was not qualified as a social equity applicant. Break that down a little bit more and sort of what did we learn from the court's decision?
Yes. So remember, back in the long ago box, coming out of the legislative session, we had the specific definition of who is a social equity applicant for purposes of Minnesota cannabis licensure. And it said that someone who was convicted of a possession or sale or their child father, whatever, and then child or parent, and then it went on from there, okay? But a conviction was the word that the statute used. So OCM, in telling its agent, Creative Services, Inc., who to, pre-approve as a social equity applicant, we went through that thing in July. OCM had instructed CSI that people who had a stay of adjudication on their record, that did not count as a conviction for purposes of state law. And so, I do like Senator Lindsey Port actually said in a panel on this topic, something like, we had to draw a line somewhere as a policy matter. And that makes sense to me. I hurt for those people like Wes King and others who had a stay of adjudication on their record, because a stay of adjudication is a thing that can make it harder for people to find housing and jobs and that kind of stuff. At the same time, it is a lesser thing to have on your record than a full conviction, which is why people's criminal defense lawyers helped them plead down to a stay of adjudication when this all originally happened, right? So it's just a complicated question about sort of who is a social equity applicant and who should be a social equity applicant. So the court in this case basically heard from Wes King and the OCM and said, this is a political question. Okay. The question is, who did the legislature mean to be qualified as a social equity applicant? And here we think it's pretty clear that it was people who had that conviction of sale and possession, and that doesn't include people with the stay of adjudication on their record. And that's not something that like we can change as a court. Like that's just, the legislature could change it if they wanted to, next session. But here, Wes King doesn't have any leg to stand on here.
Okay, that totally makes sense. And then for people that might not have a background in law or in criminal justice, can you sort of explain it like I'm 5 version of a stay of adjudication?
Okay.
Are you guilty? Like what does that mean in essence?
Yeah. And here I'm relying on what I learned from my partners, Dan Adkins and Sean Caron, who do criminal defense. Because of course I am not a criminal defense lawyer.
I'm a bat, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Dan is a Division III umpire for baseball. He's a fearsome personality sometimes. Anyway, good man to have on your side. So he's my law partner, and Sean is our associate. And I had a good talk with them before I wrote that piece for Blunt Strategies. Basically, a stay of adjudication is in between a conviction and being found innocent of something.
For sure.
You agree that if you manage to meet the conditions for the certain amount of time, then the conviction will go away, which is why it's a stay. It's a stay of judicial process. That's what adjudication means.
For sure. Okay.
And so it's a thing that your criminal defense lawyer might ask for to try to mitigate the damage.
So something that sort of ironically was created to alleviate the potential harms of the war on drugs now is perhaps a barrier for those people looking to become, not a barrier, but it doesn't make them a social equity applicant. They pled it down when if they maybe took the conviction, now they would be social equity applicants, in short.
Right, and I think that is irony, if I remember English correctly.
Yeah. It's like rain on your wedding day?
It is. It's something like that, So it's a complicated result. This is such a complicated area of law. Yeah. But yes. And for me, the other thing that I note about that litigation is that I was concerned that the court would say, we need more time to look at this. Let's delay the lottery or maybe even rerun the lottery, which of course would have even further delayed the industry opening. So I was really hoping that would not happen.
Yeah. Well, so I guess the eyes turn back to the legislature. It'll be interesting to see if there's a push this coming session or in the future to widen the expansion of social equity applicant. There's more to come. So the other case that I want to ask you about that I think has a really interesting impact on home growers throughout the entire state looked at what it means to be a seller of cannabis. Now, we have a provision in the Minnesota Constitutional, the peddler's provision, if you will, that says, in short, and it's slightly summarized, any person may sell the products of their farm or garden without obtaining a license. Now, the court looked at this and said, does this apply to cannabis? And they didn't say no. They just sort of said, we don't have the ability to make this choice yet. They ruled it not ripe. What does that mean?
Yes. This is kind of law school professor territory. Man, you're making me work hard for my podcast.
Hey, I appreciate it, though, because when I saw that it was deemed not ripe, I literally had never heard that legal term before that day.
Yes. So there's this idea in law of you cannot bring just a hypothetical question to a court, right? Would it be a crime if someone did X? And that's in the public interest because that would just tie up the court system. And also, a court is not an oracle, right? Instead, it has to rule on real facts before it.
Yeah, for sure.
So that's what we say, in law school, court can't where they have not yet suffered any damage, for instance. They are just saying this law is in effect and it restricts my ability to do things, and that's the damage, and then you fight about that. Okay,
totally.
So the doctrine of ripeness has to do with, is there a real plaintiff who has suffered a real injury and therefore and otherwise that it's ready for the court to take action on this question. Okay, that's a really nice way to say it.
Okay.
And a less friendly way to say it is that a court can dodge ruling on a question by saying, "Oh, it's not really ready for us." It and so.
So because here we had essentially 3 med growers and 1 non-medical grower that said, "I want to sell my flower. I haven't yet, but I want to, but the law prevents me." They haven't necessarily there's not the harm that they can sue over and say, "Hey, I was arrested for this and I shouldn't have been." It's more the theoretical, I could get arrested for this and I don't want to be.
True, but there's even an additional layer between of the ripeness argument in this case. Excuse me. The court said that it was not right because OCM has not finished its rulemaking.
Okay,
and
totally.
it is possible that in that rulemaking, OCM would allow home growers to sell their flower, which is a very odd thing for the court to say.
Yeah.
Now, I wasn't at all the hearings and I didn't read all the briefings, but I would say I think it is unlikely that the OCM's rules will allow home growers to sell their flower because of how the statute is written, and OCM is constrained. The power of a regulatory body is less than the statute, is what the statute delegates to them, right? So I thought it was an odd result, but basically what it does is kick this really important question down the road for another lawsuit, right? And the really important question, as you teed it up at the beginning, is we have a right under the Minnesota Constitution to sell the products of our farm and garden.
Yeah.
Does that extend to home grow cannabis, right? So there was a suit in Minnesota long before we were legalized.
Oh, yeah. Our buddy Chris Wright, who we've talked to before, was the plaintiff in that case.
And the Minnesota courts found, no, it doesn't apply to cannabis because it's illegal. Other cases on this have found that sort of reasonable restrictions, such as, so not on cannabis, but on homemade jams or, things like that. Like there can be safety regulation or something like that. Wow, this is a hot issue, and a lot of people feel very strongly about it. So, okay, now we're going to keep working on it, I guess.
So sort of stepping out of the thicket of it, and it's sort of a weird question, but sort of taking the lawyer hat off, you've spent a lot of time, like I have, hearing OCM talk about regulations, hearing lawmakers talk about regulations. I recall nearly every time they talk about sales, there being licensure tied to that. Licensure is laid out in statute. There are the 12 license types, however many there are now. Do you see a future where OCM says, yeah, home growers, you can sell your product under the current statutory rules today?
A lot of things surprise me in the world, but I would be surprised.
Okay. Yeah, I think I too would be very surprised by that. But I guess, I've been surprised that they named a director that I had never heard of before, and I was even more surprised she resigned the next day. And
it's true.
I've been surprised by sort of the rollout of this process. So I guess maybe the courts are seeing something that we aren't seeing, and maybe we'll be surprised again. All right. Well, we're going to take a short break here. And then when we get back, I want to talk about an editorial that you recently had published in the Star Tribune and hear a little bit more about your thoughts on fun local zoning stuff. So Stick around and we'll be right back. Today's episode of Northern Lights is presented by Northstar Law Group, a trusted partner for small businesses in Minnesota's legal cannabis industry. Whether you've already applied for a license or just getting started, attorney Jen Reise and her team can help you build a compliant business, identify and navigate risks, put together an application, and keep you informed about the ever-changing Minnesota cannabis landscape. Are you ready to add Northstar to your team? Visit northstarlaw.com/cannabis and let Northstar Law Group guide you through confidently opening your doors. Again, that's northstarlaw.com/cannabis. back. All right, so Jen, I'm really excited to ask you more about an editorial that you recently had published in the Star Tribune. So the tale of two city ordinances. It was really cool reading more about the impacts of Minneapolis, St. Paul, some of the zoning provisions that they're considering or have already approved. Just like, I really encourage people to go check out the article. We'll put it in the show notes. But high level, like, why does city zoning matter when it comes to cannabis businesses?
Oh man, Tanner, it matters so much. Cities are not able to say no to cannabis retail businesses under HF 100, but they can limit the number, and they can also play various kinds of games about how they set zoning for different kinds of cannabis businesses. And we are seeing cities, wrestling with this issue all over Minnesota right now.
For sure.
And I've been impressed by what St. Paul has done. And so one of my goals in this editorial was to raise that up and say, these are the things that I like about what St. Paul has done, thinking carefully about how much of the city it would take off the map if they used the whole 500 feet from every school, et cetera, right? So they went to 300 and they published both maps, which I thought was brilliant.
Yeah.
And I also really like that they're letting people locate both their retail and their grow together because, think about it. We've got all these people who want to be micro licensees. One of the cool things about having the micro license is being able to do all the different activities.
Absolutely.
You don't have to do them in the same space pursuant to OCM rules, but it's going to be more expensive not to, right? You're going to have to lease 2 spaces or whatever. But if there's no city that lets you do them together, then that doesn't work, right? And so the cities, going back to where you started, the cities are key because they're part of how we actually implement the law. Can we get open, thriving, economically sustainable cannabis businesses, right? And where will they be? So I think there's going to be some good ones in St. Paul. Minneapolis, I would say, is not bad, right? It's just not as good as St. Paul. There are certainly other cities in Minnesota that I rail about from time to time, who are, I think, so caught in the stigma of cannabis, that leftover, war on drugs mentality, that they can't even see the economic opportunity that's right in front of them.
Yeah, very much so. We'll have to give you a tour of the Dabbler Depot before we head out here. But they actually have a whole room in back that was built with the idea of eventually becoming a grow. And it's cool seeing like what a micro business could look like in Minnesota. Now, what's a bummer is this same type of building on a commercial strip in Minneapolis wouldn't really be able to exist, at least in that idea, under the zoning rules that they have now. So I think that's such an important point of like, it's really going to impact how we do everything.
Because these are actual things that we have to, get a building and do. And as we said before, there are a lot of entrepreneurs that don't have a building yet because they haven't had to have one. And that's a huge expense that they were able to delay. And so as soon as we finally do this lottery, or even starting a little before, we are going to see people trying to figure out, where am I going to locate this precious business? And cities are still wrestling with how to do that.
Yeah. It will be interesting to see where Minneapolis sort of ends up. I agree with you. I think it has gotten a lot better, especially from where it was a couple of months ago. It will be, I think, a fun experiment to see the Twin Cities sort of figure out, how does legal cannabis look and what does that Minnesota model really look like in practice?
We are also one of the metro areas that has the most different municipalities as part of the metro area.
Interesting. Okay.
Yes, some quirk of history of how Minneapolis and St. Paul grew, and so the first-rank suburbs stayed separate municipalities and get to make their own rules on stuff like this. So it's a much more like scattershot regulatory look than someplace like Denver even.
Yeah. And it's so unique seeing, I've learned so much about alcohol regulation over the last couple of months as learning about cannabis regulation.
Right.
And it's unique going to towns and not really realizing like, oh, there are really only like municipal dispensary or liquor stores here. Or like, wow, all of the liquor stores close at 9 p.m. every single night. And those rules that maybe didn't necessarily impact my life as a non-alcohol user suddenly are going to be impacting businesses that I hope to visit quite regularly. And if they're not able to be open late on Sundays, if they're only in deeply industrial areas, like I think there's a lot to be said about the access of cannabis, not just being legalized, but the implementation on that local level.
Yes. I learned something interesting from a tour of a grow that I went on in Denver. And those guys said to me, Colorado was so anti-cannabis when they legalized that they put it in sort of the poorest industrial areas of Denver. That was the only place that we were allowed to be. And so we're all in these big warehouses that we had to spend a lot of money to retrofit. And there's no way that we can get up to the kind of like cleanliness and eco-friendliness standards that we would like to be at, because we started with all this terrible industrial real estate. So that's a thought too, right? Like we can be a modern, safe, clean, eco-friendly industry more easily if we are treated as a regular industry.
Yeah. I'm just so excited to see this all roll out. I think excited for some cities more than others. Earlier in the show, which we're actually doing after this recording, but we're talking about some municipalities that are looking at like, what does local cannabis look like for us? And I think it will be cool a year or two from now to look at the 200 some, township cities, incorporated jurisdictions in the Twin Cities that really make it up, and to see what does cannabis look like. Yeah,
a lot of interesting things on the table right now.
Well, so aside from zoning, what are some of those things that you're watching over the next couple of months? Obviously, we have licensure coming up at some point, that lottery. But what are some of the things that you're watching for your clients?
Well, definitely going to be waiting with bated breath for the revised rules of the OCM.
Oh, for sure.
To come out. I and many people had submitted voluminous comments about their first draft. And so interested to see those come. Some of that stuff is going to make it, significantly more or less burdensome to open a business. And so still trying to get our arms around things like how much are those security requirements going to set us back and so forth. Eventually there will be a lottery, I hope. No, I know that there will be. There will be.
Well, and that's it. So, like, shout out to the state employees that are doing this work.
That's true.
Because we've both had times as educators where you're reviewing work that students have done, and now their job is to do that for applications day after day, hour after hour, week after week, as it keeps going on. And, like, we are very grateful that people are doing that work. We never mean to say, like, it's slow, but it's important work, that's for sure.
It is. And piles of poorly written essays are, somebody told me you get paid for grading, not for teaching. That was definitely true for
I like
me.
that. I like that a lot.
Yeah.
But I think
I am teaching, by the way, this semester.
I
can talk about that a little bit.
Sure.
Yeah, I just had class this morning. It was so much fun. Mitchell Hamlin School of Laws brought me back as an adjunct professor to do the seminar on marijuana and the law.
Yeah.
Or I kind of do my marijuana and the law.
There we go. That NPR. Right?
Oh, yeah. And it's a lot of fun. I've got almost 20 students who are really excited to learn about this area. I did it as a synchronous remote class so that I can take advantage of the many students that Mitchell Hamlin has all over the country. I've got students in Alaska and Nevada and Arkansas who are writing about cannabis laws in their state, which is really fun because the class also includes this whole part where they have to go do a project and then present to the rest of us. And we'll also put the blogs out on Northstar's website.
That's really cool.
If people want to do that. And so I'm super excited for that. In my opinion, there's just a need for a lot of research and writing about cannabis, a lot of educating to do of ourselves and others. And so I wanted them to be able to both skill up, but also share that with the world.
I love that. That's really cool. We've talked in this show before about doctors that are being trained on like, what does cannabis do to our systems, and being able to go out and be the doctors that actually have that knowledge and educate. It's cool to have you be part of that, like, next wave of lawyers, either the people that will be figuring out how does cannabis law actually get implemented and practiced, and not something that was taught in law school 20 years ago as a business opportunity, but more as a criminal justice opportunity.
Exactly. And I also do have, wannabe prosecutors in my class, and I hope that they'll be better prosecutors for having been in the class as well.
I really think this class is cool. I remember when the U of M sort of created their first What is Cannabis class. But you're really part of this wave of educating like the next generation of lawyers. Have you heard from your students like what is motivating them to be interested in cannabis law specifically?
Yes, and like many of us in the movement, it's a lot of different things. Some of them want to be better prosecutors or business lawyers or criminal defense lawyers, specifically on the issue of cannabis. Others of them are more policy-minded.
Okay, for sure.
And are really interested in thinking about sort of cannabis versus hemp and so forth. I also really like teaching this seminar because in some ways the uncertainty and the rapid change in the law around cannabis helps students understand that, in fact, the law itself is changing all the time on lots of issues, right? For instance, we're in a very different antitrust moment than we were 100 years ago. Okay, but that seems really lame. So like to say this case was decided 10 years ago, and I do not think it would be decided the same today, right? It's true in cannabis all the time. And so to be able to impress upon students how like we are part of riding the wave, maybe even in, pushing the law to where we think that it should be, is a cool thing to be able to show law students.
Interesting.
Finally, this issue just like touches all these really interesting areas in law, including federal and state preemption. And it doesn't necessarily fall on ideological lines like some of the other issues of our time. And so it's helpful for law students to kind of open up their understanding.
I like that. That's really cool. I had never really thought before, but now hearing you say that, I reflect a bit more, that I've been working at Northstar for like 3 or 4 weeks now. In that time, there's been 3 court decisions that have come out that have really sort of, maybe not upright overturned, but shifted how we think about cannabis. And that's just in Minnesota, like not nationally. And we know that there's a lot happening.
There's a lot happening nationally
as well.
Yes.
Like this is a very interesting field to be in. And I imagine it is for lawyers as well.
It's an extremely, what would I say? It's an extremely interesting field to be as a lawyer.
I think
we have the International Cannabis Bar Association, and we're going to have a CLE the day before MJ BizCon in November, and I'm super excited that they asked me to speak on a panel about how Minnesota is balancing hemp and cannabis regulation, and then we're going to hear from some people in other places, California, Montreal, who are doing it totally differently, right? Because, I mean, it's not. This is not going to last forever, that we have this weird total amalgamation of contrary regulation, right? Like we have a chance to understand and hopefully be part of breaking that knot and like figuring out how the world is going to move forward, or it's going to move forward, right? Like we are in the middle of a huge season of change, and it's easy to see it in cannabis, but it's actually true in a larger like geologic scale of the, policy.
I love that. It's the microcosm of everything going on can be seen through cannabis in Minnesota. I can't think of a better note to go out on like that. I think that really wraps up sort of what's going on in the industry right now, and just sort of the changing nature, the shifting nature. But it's cool to be sort of on that cutting edge of what the next chapter looks like. We're all building it together.
Yeah, that's for sure.
So like I said, I really encourage people to go check out that article in the show notes. But one thing that I wanted to pull out of your article that I thought was really interesting is the part where you were talking about the smell of cannabis and how Minneapolis is looking at it as this really dangerous odor that's going to be permeating out from buildings and, causing children to go into chaos. And I don't really know that whatever they think the smell of cannabis is going to do. And you compared it to the smell of like barbecue or of like processed food.
Yeah, specifically, I said Malta-Meal from
Yeah,
where I went to
yeah.
college in Northfield. I mean, we would walk down the hill and it would smell very strong of some different cereal on different days. It was very strange, right? And everybody just, oh, well, that's what happens at St. Olaf. That's weird, man. That's weird,
Yeah.
right? And I have never encountered a cannabis business that smells in any way the volume of that.
No, I've lived in so many places where it's like, wow, I can smell that business down the street. And it's like they're working on cars or they're cooking food or they're doing something. And it's just sort of like, well, crazy world, lots of smells. Like it's...
Exactly. We live in a community, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of like people complaining about a little bit of cannabis odor from their neighbors across the back fence.
Yeah.
That's true, but Karen, I can hear your kids screaming for hours and that dog that you never let inside, right? Yeah. So, I mean, okay. So I haven't said that, right? I'm a Minnesotan woman. I'm not going to say that.
For sure.
But just we choose to live next to people, then there are people next to us. We live in community, and so I want to be a good neighbor to them, but I also get to take up space.
Yeah, well, and I think it's such a great point that, like, let's say we wanted to make a craft barbecue industry in our state. Like, oh, that's cool. Let's really invite in businesses. But then we required every barbecue to have $1.5 million HVAC system.
Right.
How inviting is that actually to small businesses? Sure, you might get a couple large-scale restaurants that come in, but is your mom and pop restaurant going to be able to open?
No, you're going to shut them down, regulatory speaking, right? Yeah, that's not where we want to be.
Yeah. That's such an interesting thought. And I appreciated that you mentioned that in the article, which again, I would encourage people to go check out. But I think there were so many elements. No, but I think there's so many elements where it's how will cities impact what dispensaries look like, what grows look like, what testing facilities look like. And like you mentioned earlier, putting them into the back corners of our city where we sort of want to put them and forget about is not how we support small businesses. And it's not how we provide equitable access to something that some people legitimately use as medicine.
Very true. So, Tanner, I have listened to the first episodes of this, and I'm really enjoying the high notes thing that you guys are doing.
Okay, for sure. Absolutely.
And I wondered if I could offer a high note.
Oh, please. Yeah. What have you been thinking about while smoking up this weed? What's your high note?
So I've been thinking a lot about people who are not current cannabis users and who are interested in seeing if they want to try it, as a substitute for alcohol or to help with pain or sleep or whatever. I'm thinking especially of older people, but also of people that are new to the industry. Had some conversations with people that really sparked this for me, that there's such a need for education. People are overwhelmed by the different consumption modalities, overwhelmed by all the brands that are, people don't understand kind of what they will experience if they try it, which is in part because there's so little research, and also we're not allowed to say things that the FDA hasn't approved, right? So it's, I feel like there's a huge need for education out there, and that nobody, I think, is grabbing those reins. Like you and the Minnesota Cannabis College and others are doing such a great job educating people once they've sort of come into the industry and are ready to take that next level to home grow or whatever. But who is saying to people, this is what CBD does?
Yeah.
This is maybe a good dose to start with, other than the people, who are working the dispensaries, bless them, who tell me that they do it all day, every day.
Yeah. I love that, because I think it really, it's very topical, where we talked last week about a NPR Care 11 Star Tribune poll that came out that was really shocking to me, that said something like 80% of Minnesotans don't consume cannabis and haven't in the past month. And I think I'm in this smoke-filled bubble of everyone smokes cannabis around me. That's just what people do. That I think I often forget about. There's so many people that need to be educated on what this is, what appropriate use looks like, how they could use it in their life, even down to just you walk in and there's 8 different types of flower. What is the difference? You can't just tell someone they smell different. Legitimately, how do you explain that to someone? I think I like that. That's a really good one. I'm gonna keep. I'll keep thinking about that one, because I think that is a big need, especially as we move forward into increased access, not just to edibles, which is cool, but all the rest of what this industry means.
And I think too, if we can educate, then we work against that stigma that non-cannabis people largely still hold, including some of them that sit on, for instance, city councils. They just don't understand, and they don't know what they don't know.
Yeah, I think that's right. Shine light. That's how you get rid of the darkness. Well, Jen, thank you so much for coming on today. It was really a treat being able to catch up with you on camera and being able to show you off the studio, and we'll have to finish with the tour here. But before we go, for people that heard you talk a little bit about helping cannabis businesses, for people that maybe just have more questions for you about law and cannabis generally, how would you recommend people go and reach out to you?
Yeah. So check out our website at northstarlaw.com/cannabis. That's our cannabis group. You can fill out a web form there, or you can call our front desk at 651-330-9678. That's also the same front desk number for my criminal defense partners. If anybody needs to talk to them, it's all one number, which we did on purpose. We want to be a place where people can call and get help, right? Whether it's inspectors or police, or closer to my heart, building a business for success from the beginning. So northstarlaw.com/cannabis, and I offer a 15-minute free consultation for cannabis businesses that are looking for a lawyer.
Awesome. Very cool. Well, Jen, truly thank you so much for coming in today. I appreciate it. We're going to take a short break here, but then we're going to be back with the rest of our high notes. So.
Glad to be here.
Today's episode of Northern Lights is presented by Northstar Law Group, a trusted partner for small businesses in Minnesota's legal cannabis industry. Whether you've already applied for a license or just getting started, attorney Jen Reise and her team can help you build a compliant business, identify and navigate risks, put together an application, and keep you informed about the ever-changing Minnesota cannabis landscape. Are you ready to add Northstar to your team? Visit northstarlaw.com/cannabis and let Northstar Law Group guide you through confidently opening your doors. Again, that's northstarlaw.com/cannabis.